Hello everybody and welcome back to another Kings of War battle report. I'm Visibly Riley, and today we have the Empire of Dust versus Varangur. This battle was fought at 2250 points and the scenario was Scavenge. So here we see my opponent's army, and it is an interesting one. To start us off, we have a regiment of Reavers, then two regiments of Sons of Korgan, both of whom have Mask of the Reaper for Life Leech 1, and then one has the Brew of Sharpness and two-handed weapons. Then we have a troop of Warband, two regiments of Horse Raiders with the bow upgrade, a mounted Sons of Korgan regiment with the Blade of Slashing, two troops of Tundra Wolves, a chieftain with Diadem of Dragonkind, two Magus, both of whom have a Familius and Mount, and then one has Fireball 12 and the other has Banechant 2, and then we have a Jabberwock. So, for my thoughts on the army, this is not how I would do anything at all. In fact, I remember when we were setting up, I asked my opponent if he has the what gift he's given the mounted Sons of Korgan, and he said none. And then he pointed that both the Sons of Korgan had gifts, and I was like, well, why would you give them gifts and not the mounted sons? That doesn't make any sense. And I mean, I didn't get a lot out of that. Then later in the game, I found out it was Mask of the Reaper and not Fury, so Life Leech instead of Fury, and I just sort of stared at it and went, wow, I don't get this at all. So, yeah, needless to say, this is not the type of army I would build. I think it's too heavy on characters. It only has one Inspire with all, you know, it only has 3 characters, but two Magi and then one Chieftain. With one Inspire, I just don't see it really. The Jabberwock, fun fact, so in 2019, they upgraded the Jabberwock to have 8 attacks instead of 4, which is pretty good because 4 attacks was laughably bad. But the text for its special ability that gives it the extra attacks still references that it has 4 attacks, not 8. So maybe a bit of a cleanup there. There's also 35 points missing from the army. I'm sure that it's some item somewhere that I'm just not seeing, probably on the other Sons of Korgan unit, but I don't know what that was. So moving forward, interesting army. To the Empire of Dust, this is, again, so after playing that Enslaved Guardian spam list, I went back to the table and came up with this army. It's not optimized, mostly because it has to be ready. I had to have this army ready by, I think, the end of April, I want to say. So it's just, you know, a bunch of units I already have painted, mixed with some units that I want to paint for an event in August, if I end up playing my Empire of Dust. So it's a bit of a mishmash there. Starting out, we have the Mummy's Revenge, you know, pretty good always, with a Cursed High Priest with Heal 4 and Shroud of the Saint, and then both the regiments of Mummies. Again, that formation gives the Mummies Elite and Vicious. Then I have a Horde of Skeleton Archers with Fire Oil, a Horde of Skeleton Warriors with Banner the Griffin, a Horde of Enslaved Guardians with Brew of Haste and Weakness this time, then 2 regiments of Revenant Chariots, Apophis with Winged Worm, Mortibrus the Necromancer, and then a Bone Giant, 1, and a Soul Stayer. So, yeah, my thoughts on the army. I don't think the Skeleton Archers are any better than just Skeleton Warriors. In fact, I think if I just brought Skeleton Warriors and spent the 20 points on the Dragon Shard Shield, they'd just be a better unit. But I have Archers painted, so they're probably gonna stay. Next up for the weirder things, I have the Enslaved Guardians still. I took out most of the units of them, and that's because Ushabti are like $30 a model online, so I just can't afford that. So, you know, if you want to sell me Ushabti for 15 or 20 bucks a pop, I'll pay it, but I just can't do that $30, especially with how many recasters there are. Like, there's all this recasting going on and it's still 30, so I'm sorry, I just can't do that. So instead, I'm using the Ushabti I have, and I think Weakness is probably a better spell for them than than Drain Life. I think that Drain Life could work out, or I spamming a bunch of Ushabti like in my previous list, but if I'm gonna bring 1 or 2 hordes of them, which I think is probably more my style, Weakness is the better bet. I gave them the Brew of Haste just in case I wanted to hide behind my skeletons, because with Speed 6 I can't actually move my unit over the skeletons, but with Speed 7 I can, because 160 millimeters is just slightly over 6 inches, so I can get right over it, and that's what she said. As for the rest of the stuff, it's just units I like. I have I have 6 painted chariots for, well, back in the day for Tomb Kings, but now for the Empire of Dust, and they are slightly different. So I thought, well, I do like chariot regiments as chaff. I think they're very good. So why not just bring the two regiments there. I'm not sure what I'm going to do for Apophis. In this game, you'll see a possible model that I could bring, and then one that I think a lot of people think of when they think of Apophis, but I have other ideas too. And yeah, the Soul Snare is excellent, Bone Giants are good, Mortibrus is a pimp. So we'll see how the army does. Moving on. This is the table. So first off, we're playing Scavenge, and you'll notice that we're playing on, a little over 2/3 of the table, and that's because we have such elite armies, or I mean my army is not particularly elite, but it is a small drop army. So we've just gathered around. So let's talk about the scenario. So first off, in Scavenge, there are 3 objective markers. So we've got 1, 2, and 3. So the first thing that happens is you set 1 objective marker in the exact center of the table. So we put that down, and then each player takes turns putting down another objective marker on the center line more than 12 inches away from another objective and more than 3 inches away from impassable. So we've got this one. My opponent puts this one down, probably expecting me to put one over here, but I don't really want to. So instead I just put one over here, which is in a sweet spot of being more than 12 inches away here, and then being more than 3 away from the board edge and that piece of impassable terrain. So that's the idea. In this scenario, you've got those, again, you've got those 3 control points, and then you want to go over to them, and at the beginning of your turn, if you control one of them, you spawn a loot token that you can put on any of your units. So once you have that loot token, you can't get another one. Each unit can only hold 1 loot token in this scenario. So you get a loot token, and you run around with it. You do the normal loot stuff, with the only other exception to the loot token being that if you beat a unit in combat and they had a loot token, instead of picking it up or leaving it on the ground, you can choose to burn it. So you can destroy the loot tokens. So you don't end up with, like a bunch of loot tokens just scattered across the table because you've killed them all with your units that already have loot. So that's the scenario, and the person with the highest, with the most loot at the end of the game wins. So let's talk about the train real quick. We're not really going to talk about the train over here because we don't really go. So what we've got here, we start here with an impassable piece, which includes the whole of the base, not just the rock. So we've got an impassable piece of terrain. I believe we ran it as a height 1 or height 2, so it's pretty short, but it is difficult to get past. Then we have a big wizard tower, which is an impassable height 6 piece of terrain. We have a height 1 obstacle attached to it. And then below that, we have a height 6 forest. Above the forest, we have a rather large height 2 hill in the center of the table. Over here, we have a height, I think we ran this as a height 1 difficult piece. Above it, another height 6 forest. And then if we go into my opponent's deployment zone, you can see there's a height flat piece of rough terrain there. And finally, another height 6 forest, so a small one there. There is more terrain on this side of the table, but yeah, we don't really need to talk about it. Oh, there is one more piece we need to talk about, which is right here under my 2nd Chariot Regiment. That is another height 1 difficult piece of terrain, just like this one here. So that's the table. Let's get into the armies. Here we see my opponent's list, so we're starting on, as I would see it, the left side of the flank. So in front, this is the Warband troop. Behind them, that is the Sons of Korgan with the 2 hand weapons and the Brew of Sharpness. Then we have the Reavers right there, all 7 of them. And then we have a unit of Tundra Wolves. Next to them, the Chieftain on foot with Diadem of Dragonkind. This is the first Magus, and then this one has Fireball, I believe. It's not the Banechant one. So yeah, that one's Fireball. Then we have the 1st regiment of Horsemen, whatever they're called. So Horsemen right there with the bows. Behind them, that is the Jabberwock. And then to the right of that, we have our 2nd regiment of Sons of Korgan. These ones just have the Life Leech. Then we have another, the second Magi. This one has Banechant. And then we have the Mounted Sons of Korgan, of course, of Korgans, or maybe that's where the 35 points went. I bet they have, no, they have Blade of Slashing. So they have Blade of Slashing. Then we have a second unit of Horsemen, and then in front, the second unit of Tundra Wolves. So pretty compact list. Moving on to the Empire of Dust. You can see the mummies are missing about half their number. That's because they got dipped the other day. So yeah, they're awaiting paint. But in front, we've got the 2 regiments of mummies. Behind them, the horde of skeleton warriors with Banner the Griffin. Right here, we have Mortibris himself hanging out behind the castle. Next to Mortibris, we have the Soul Snare. Then next to the Soul Snare, we have the horde of archers with the Bone Giant next to them. Then next picture here, next to Bone Giant in the woods, we've got the first Curse High Priest, or the only one, I guess, in this list. Apophis, which is, I guess, just, what is it, Nagash's tendrils today. But yeah, Nagash there, filling in as Apophis. In front of Apophis, we have the Enslaved Guardian Horde with Weakness. Then we have the 1st Regiment of Chariots and the 2nd Regiment of Chariots. So very compact. My plan is to just rush up the table, take control of my right objective and the center objective, and then just sort of ignore the left one. If I can get it, I can get it. If I can't, I can't. So that's the plan. Turn 1. Turn 1 goes to Empire of Dust, and we advance forward. So, yeah, there's not a whole lot to do here. I wasn't sure whether I should take turn 1, because turn 1 gives you impetus to get onto the objectives before your opponent, but my opponent has a lot of cav, so he can probably, or they can probably get onto them before I can, and by probably I mean they can. So, I'm not sure whether I should have taken the first turn here, but I kind of just took it anyway. I like to see where it goes. In the future, if I was playing against this army, this particular list, I'd probably go second, but I also don't think it super matters. So anyway, we advance forward with the line, so the skeleton or the chariots just move forward. Apophis swings up behind them. Thankfully, they don't have heavy flyer anymore, so I've got that nimble pivot. I move the priest to just get make sure that the Bone Giant's still inspired, even though there's very limited shooting that threatens him. Then we've got the archers just staying put with the Soul Snare advancing forward, and this is why the big reason why I don't think I should have taken first turn, because the Soul Snare cannot shoot anything if I take first turn. So yeah, probably a mistake. But yeah, the Soul Snare moves forward. Mortibris just stays behind the castle, making sure that this unit of mummies is still under his spell. So I've got Stealth there, and I have Inspire. Speaking of the mummies, they just advance forward 5 with the skeletons following up in the rear. With the plan with the skeleton archers to not move them, they currently can't shoot, but I'm just going to surge them forward, hit my Soul Snare, and then shoot into one of these 2 units. So we'll see how that goes. And as you can see here, the skeleton archers did in fact get surged forward, and I go for a couple of shots here. My archers shoot into, they fire a volley into this unit of horsemen, and, yeah, so yeah, we end up doing 6 or 7 wounds, so pretty crazy. Good dice there. And then I decide to fire off. Mortibris can't see anything. That was a mistake. I thought about moving him into a place where I could get a lightning bolt off, but at the end of the day, I couldn't really get one. I also didn't want to be too close to the board edge here because it makes it so you can't pivot. So, I don't know. Maybe it wasn't a mistake, maybe it was. But couldn't get any shots off there. The chariots both after... Yeah, I think I do remember this. These horsemen end up taking 6 wounds, and then both of my chariots see an opportunity and fire into the horsemen as well, just trying to get them off the table. I do not manage to remove them. Oh, I figured it out. Yeah, it's that these guys have the Banner of the Griffin. Yeah, I just need to know where 10 points are. But yes, these Mounted Sons have the Banner of the Griffin, because when I shoot into these horsemen, I kill them on the first roll. I re-roll it, and I kill them again. But because the Banner of the Griffin's here, instead they're merely wavered. So yeah, a pretty good start to Empire of Dust turn, and we'll see what the Sons do in, or the Varangur do in response. So in response, the Varangur just sort of run up the table. On the left here, it's a little interesting. I like, oh, and you can see this this unit has 1 wound. That's because, I can't remember, something shot into it. Maybe it was these chariots because they didn't really have a shot here. But yeah, they shoot into them, they do 1 wound, it doesn't really do anything. But I like this. The Reavers and the Warband are just looking to take some charges and just get wrecked. The dogs have an easy charge into my chariots, which honestly I didn't see, but also I don't really care. I lose my Thunderous, but he's wrecking one of my chaff units with one of his chaff units. It's just not that big of a deal, and I should be able to easily kill off those dogs given the amount of support I have over here. So it doesn't really matter, but I like this this formation because the dogs are also helping to protect the Reavers a little bit from from the chariots. Although I think if my opponent hadn't charged, they could have instead blocked up the enslaved guardians as well. Now, on the hill, I really don't understand this. So there's a wizard on the hill, and then there's the chieftain on the hill. They both move over here so they can get a breath attack onto some Def 5 units, right? Like, why? And also, they're in a line, so I can kill, the wizard is in the front, and if I kill the wizard, I can overrun into the chieftain, right? So if you're gonna do this, at least put the chieftain in the front, because he's much tougher. Although, I guess the Inspire, but yeah, just don't do this at all, I guess is really the answer. So I don't get that part. The horsemen back here that were wavered just have to chill out. The Sons of Korgan with the Banner of the Griffin were in the woods, so they just advance forward a little bit. We've got the second wizard just helping out these cav. In fact, at this point in the game, I thought this wizard had the Inspiring Talisman, because yeah, he was staying in a good distance from these cav units, making sure that they were inspired, but yeah, he totally doesn't, so I don't really get it. My opponent's doing pretty much the same thing I'm doing over here, which is this token in particular, which is the one I set. There's an impassable piece here and an impassable piece here, so it really funnels you into it. You either have to go on like that route around, or my route's like that. But yeah, it's pretty difficult to get to this token, and you can protect yourself with the impassables if you want to. So anyway, the second unit of dogs has charged into one of my mummies, and because the dogs are wider than a mummy regiment, they're also blocking both the regiments of mummies, which is a little unfortunate. So in the, I don't know. Again, I don't want to really close this distance to the board edge, because if I do, I might not be able to pivot in the future. But still, I might have wanted to do that a little bit, but I don't. And then with, yeah, so in combat, my opponent's dogs here, the Thunderwolves, I think they have nine attacks, something like that. They do 6 wounds to my chariots, so that was pretty spectacular. They actually killed them on the first roll, but on the reroll, my opponent fails, thankfully. So yeah, taking 6 damage there, it's a little higher than I expected. But on the other side, these dogs end up doing, I think, 1 wound to the mummies, 1 or 2 wounds to the mummies, which is not enough to even roll, so nothing happens over there. And turn 1 goes interesting. I don't get this this hill move, but I don't really understand the army, so maybe it's fine. Turn 2. So turn 2, Empire of Dust. Yeah, we're gonna do some charges. So starting on the left, we have my chariots going into the Thrall troop, just hoping to get rid of the chap real quick. And then these Sons of Korgan can just wreck me. I don't care. And then Apophis, this gap between where the dogs, after they bounce back an inch, right, there is a little over 3 inches here. And so, granted, 75 millimeters isn't even 3 inches, but there's just a little bit more. So Apophis can fit pretty perfectly. So I go for that. Apophis goes in. I could have flown over, but I just wanted to get into a fight. I take my enslaved guardians here, and I wanted to cast weakness onto this this unit of Sons of Korgan, forgetting that they had 2 hand weapons, meaning that they're crushing 3. So it's a little ridiculous, and because I'm sitting in front of him with def 4 units, weakness doesn't matter. So I definitely should have just gone for that Wind Blast 5 and pushed them off a little bit to make it so they only ever had the chariots to charge. But anyway, I do that. I'm also now getting ready for a flank surge to get into the Reapers to make sure Reapers make sure that they're gone. My Bone Giant has an easy charge into this Magus, so takes it, hoping to kill him off, go into the Chieftain. I mean, I could kill that off too, but I mean, Bone Giants are just pretty random in their damage output. My archers don't move at all because I don't really see a reason to move them. I take my Curse High Priest and go back to the woods, mostly to make sure that I'm still inspired on the archers here, and also because I can already cast my my Surge onto my Surge target, which is the Enslaved Guardians, and Apophis is very inspiring, so he's got this covered. The Soul Snare moves over to the hedge, getting ready to make, wherever I want the Drain Life to go, it can go. And over here on the far right, the mummies go into the countercharge into the dogs. It looks like they did 1 wound to me. And the other mummies have a flank charge because that's all they can do because of this small little bit of... It's actually right about there where the overhang is. So yeah, they just couldn't get past the dogs at all, so they pivot, hit the corner, they were in the flank, and swing around. So they go right there. Hopefully I can not double on that dog combat because that would be real bad with that flank exposed. Well, we'll see, won't we? So here's the end of shooting. I do get the weakness off, not that it matters. It looks like the Enslaved Guardians took a couple points of damage, probably from horse archers taking some pot shots at them. But oh no, it was the Chieftain and the Magus fired their Fireball and Breath attack into him, did 2 damage. So whatever. Looking down that flank charge now, pretty cool. I take my chariots and countercharge into these dogs. And I just bounce completely. So the 4 here is because the Drain Life from the Soul Snare, when I cast that, I end up doing 2 wounds to the, I believe the horsemen that were wavered before, or maybe I cast it somewhere else. But anyway, I only do 2 wounds. I heal these 2 off. My chariots just completely bounce on these dogs. 4s and 4s, 0 wounds. So don't even strip their Thunderous, which is kind of funny. The mummies thankfully just just destroy these dogs, but there's a bit of a problem again because these mummies can't reform. See these mummies, when they charged into the front, centered up on the dogs and made it so there's just not enough room to reform. So instead, I turned to face the Sons of Korgan are over here. There's an exposed flank from these knights. And I just hope that this gap between the Impassable and my mummies is just not big enough for them to fit through. Otherwise, those mummies are probably gone. I mean, Mounted Sons to the flank. That's dead. Whatever. So anyway, moving forward, you can see this is actually the beginning of Varangur turn 2, but let's talk about what happened here, which is my giant goes in, actually does pretty well, but then kind of flubs the nerve check a little bit, or maybe I didn't do that well. Anyway, I get a waiver, which is pretty cool. Again, these Sons of Korgan right here at the banner are just slightly out of 6 inches, so they can't quite give them the bonus, which will be a recurring theme in this game, because you can see there were horsemen right here, and those just get poofed, and it's because I fire into them with this Soul Snare, I fire into them with these archers, and Mortibris goes for the finishing blow, Lightning Bolt, and they are also just slightly out of 6 inches, and I get that kill off, so yeah, that's a nice little gap there. Excuse me. So the other combats, my chariots ended up killing off the Thrall, Thrall Warband, and decide to advance forward a little bit. So the plan here is because I've got Apophis who killed off, well, I guess the Guardians did most of the work, but they kill off the Reapers here. Reapers? Whatever they are. And when that happens, my 75 mil base is just slightly behind where the 1 inch would be for these chariots. So I take the chariots, go forward, and now there's no way to wheel around or get into the flank of Apophis, who is still facing this way. I could have turned to face this way, as I'm a square because I didn't kill these stupid dogs. But I decide at the end, I'd rather face this way and get ready to fight this. So that's what I do. This is the sun's turn, so and I turn the enslaved guardians to face off against these nonsense things. So let's see what happens. Quite a bit. So we've got on the left here, we have the Sons of Korgan going into my chariots. This is when my opponent tells me that they have crushed 3, and I'm like, oh no. So those chariots are not feeling well. These chariots get countercharged by dogs, which is fair enough, as I did 0 damage to them. So yeah. Then we've got the enslaved guardians they got charged by the chieftain, who just goes in on foot. I guess that's fine. And the mounted horseman can go. Mounted horseman? The horseman can go into my bone giant, and that's a fair charge considering they have 14 attacks, but they're actually better in close combat than they are at shooting. So 14 on 4s and 4s is better than the bows. But I also question it because a bone giant's just not gonna die to that. Maybe if both these units had gone into the bone giant, or maybe if the Suns could get into the bone giant, that would have been great. But when my bone giant bounces back, these Suns are just, it's slightly out of their line of sight, so they just can't see it. So speaking of those Suns, they just trundle up the board some more. The Jabberslite, that's not doing a whole lot, just mining the back lines a little bit. We've got a wizard moving forward to get Banechant going. I guess my opponent originally, I'll spoiler here, cast Banechant onto these mounted Suns, and I go, aren't they Crush 1, Thunder 2? And he's like, well, so they are. So instead, I think maybe this guy gets moved back a little bit to like here instead. But anyway, speaking of the mounted Suns, you can't really see him with the wizard tower. It's gonna obfuscate a lot of this right flank in this game. Goes into the mummies. So yeah, it turns out that the gap right here is not big enough for them to fit through, so my opponent has to take that front charge, which is good news for me. And here we see the end of combat. The Sons of Korgan just blow right through those chariots, turn to face Apophis. That's fair. And then over here, these mounted Suns blow right through these mummies, and it's one of those things where my opponent rolls very well. They end up doing 14 wounds to me, which I mean that's not the best, right? Because they have 20 attacks, something like that, like 20 attacks on 3s, and then that's 6 misses right there, but then the Blade of Slashing, so you got like 15, and then wounding on 2s, so it's only a 1-ish wound over, right? But then he rolls the nerve checks, and it's just 11 into 11, so it didn't really matter in the end. Blows right through those mummies, kills them, turns to face the mummies who are not looking at them, and I guess Mortibris, but Morty is hopefully not staying around for that nonsense. So that's what it looks like, and here's the end of the turn. You can see what happens in the middle. Yeah, the chieftain, bounces right off the enslaved guardians. Does inflict 2 more damage, but that's still a 13 to get a kill. So nothing happens there. Then we've got these guys, the horsemen going into the bone giant. They inflict 2 damage, which I guess is okay, but in the end it doesn't really do anything again. And because the bone giant, they bounce. Oh, I think maybe I get bounced back here. Anyway, when we bounce 1 inch, right, the bone giant can just face whatever direction it wants because it's a square, right? Like if I want to send it that way, I can. If I want to send it that way, I can. And then I have enough surge to just deal with it, especially as my opponent's not really dealing a lot of damage to me. I mean, not leaving a lot of wounds on the table for me to heal. So instead, they're just dying or they're fine. So I can really only use surge. Now these hero dogs, they kill off the other regiment of chariots, and that was pretty funny to me. As anytime one of your units charges into something like Tundra Wolves or whatever, and does 0 damage to them and just gets wiped off the table by that, that's just comedy gold there. So those dogs doing work. And then on the right flank, you can see now it's a game of really two-thirds of this table, right? Because we're ignoring this side. So we've got we've got over here the Jabberslythe, the Sons of Korgan, the Mounted Sons, and a Wizard versus my Skeleton Archers, the Soul Snare, one regiment of mummies, Mortibris, and a horde of skeletons. So it's actually not looking too bad. But then on this side of the table, we have the Horsemen, the Chieftain, another Magus, and the other Sons of Korgan, and some dogs, right? That's a lot of things, but they're versus Apophis, an Enslaved Guardian Horde, a Bone Giant, and a Cursed High Priest. So, I guess it's still a close game at this point. And moving forward on to turn 3. So turn 3, Empire of Dust. Getting into it. Starting on the left here, you can see I just ignore these dogs. They're too powerful, so just screw them. I take my Enslaved Guardians, and I take... Well, so I could... this token generates one loot token at the, or this control point generates a loot token at the beginning of my turn, because only the dogs and the Sons of Korgan are within 3, while I have the Enslaved Guardians and Apophis, so I've got 4 to his to my opponent's 3 unit strength there. So I control it. I can put the token on Apophis, or I can put the token onto my Enslaved Guardians. At the end of the day, I decided to go for the Enslaved Guardians because, I mean, they could have got some pretty gnarly shambling, some cool surge going on, but I just don't care too much. I really don't want it on Apophis at all. So yeah, I just go for that. Apophis charges into the Magus, who was wavered by the Bone Giant. Going into that, hoping to kill it off. I was also kind of hoping that the angle would take me into the flank of these horsemen, and it turns out, yes, it will. So as long as I can kill this wizard, this wounded wizard, I think it has 4 or 5 damage on it already. With Apophis, I can just overrun into the horse raiders. Now, speaking of overrun, I also have the Enslaved Guardians going into the Chieftain. That one is, I mean, the Chieftain is 13-15 with Def 5, so I'm looking for, you know, around 12 hits and then around 6 wounds. I don't have Brutal, but I do have Dread there, so I've got a 7, so it'll be a 9 to kill it twice. I'm not expecting that, but it would be pretty nice as these dogs and these Sons of Korgan are both looking into the rear of these Enslaved Guardians with a loot token. So, yeah. Speaking of that, I do try to solve that problem. I take my Soul Snare and I just come around over here. I'm facing towards the dogs, hoping to get a Drain Life off and kill them off. That'd be great. And the archers are just sitting, they just stay still because they're going to shoot into these horse raiders, hoping to get some damage on them and either waver or either damage them and kill them, or damage them and allow Apophis to kill them. So that's the plan, because the Bone Giant just leaves. He's not interested in it, and I just move over here to set up this surge flank charge into the Sons of Korgan, because my mummies could have surged into the front of these mounted sons, but I can't. Again, this gap is too small for them to fit through to charge into this wizard, and a frontal charge. Yeah, mummies, they're just not going to win that fight with a front charge. I mean, I don't know. They could probably win the fight, but the skeletons will do just fine. So they go into the front of these Sons of Korgan to help out the giant, because I don't really trust him. And Mortibris, you can see his little stick here, just moves over here. I can get hit by this wizard, but I don't really care. I'm giving Stealth out still, and I'm giving Inspire to these mummies, which is pretty important to me at this point. Apophis is actually inspiring this Bone Giant, for what it's worth. And moving forward with my shooting, I end up with the Drain Life. I do, I think, 1 damage or 2 damage. The Soul Snare really doesn't pay off in this game, which is unfortunate, as it's done amazingly in every other game. But yeah, I do 1 or 2 damage there, and it's not enough to break the dogs or even waver them. And then the archers do a couple damage to these horsemen, and thankfully I roll pretty high with my nerve. And my opponent actually did move this unit with Banner of the Griffin to be within 6 inches. So they've got the +1/+1 nerve, but then I have dread, so it's -1/-1. So we're just down to that 14, 16, and I roll a 17, I want to say, on the first bid, or it adds to a 17, and then on the second bid I add up to a 16, so I end up killing off these horsemen with the archers alone. So that's pretty cool. Moving on to the combats. Yeah, you can see I do manage to get that surge off with the bone giant, and these horse people are gone. And the combat, so yeah, here's the double one. So I think I've got the chieftain. It's not that high. I mean, this is a superfluous double ones because I think the chieftain's on 7 or 8 wounds here, so it wasn't actually a double one to get it killed, but it still is funny. With the dread going, the chieftain's only at 12, 14. So if I was at 7, I was looking for a 5. But I do want to say he's on 8, so I think I was looking for a 4. But I get the double one, and it doesn't matter. Also kind of funny because even if I had super juiced those dice and, you know, wrecked this guy, I would have still rolled that double one and still received a rear charge. So, Apophis ends up killing off this wizard, as is his right, and just turns to face this direction afterwards, because there's no reason to run away from this this flank, especially as it's starting to crumble. Just staring down, yeah, here's some juicy rear for you guys, yeah. And here's the end of the turn. Yeah, it looks like I did in fact do 8 wounds. But end of turn, I turn Apophis, like I said, to face this side of the table. The Bone Giant and the Mummies end up killing off the Sons of Korgan, and again face this way because this side of the table is now the one I'm going to ignore. It was the side I was going for in the first place, but I also put my toughest units over there because they can just grind, right? As long as I stop my opponent from being able to generate any tokens off this this control point, it just doesn't matter, because right now I have 1 token. Granted, I'm assumed to have 0 tokens there, but I'll probably get a token off this pretty easily, and then Apophis, assuming I can kill off these units with my shooting and Apophis, I can nab a token there for the win. So that's the plan, and moving on to turn 3 for the Varangur. So you can see the dogs take the rear charge, but the Sons of Korgan don't. So the Sons of Korgan go for a cheeky charge on Apophis. It's not the worst idea, but Apophis is a -21, so maybe not the best. So yeah, they go in there trying to kill off Apophis. The dogs go into the rear of my enslaved guardians along with the chieftain, and I think my opponent was thinking, well, I think the dogs have 9 or 10 attacks, so, you know, like, in the rear, that's 27 to 30 attacks, which is pretty good on 4s and 4s, with a chieftain in the front with 5 attacks on 3s and 3s, I want to say, with elite. So it might do something. If he kills off those enslaved guardians, that would be very bad, and then kills the enslaved guardians and Apophis, and this game busts right open. Now, on the right flank, or my right flank, you can see things are going not so well for the old skeletons, and this is where we learn about the Jabberwock, the gnashing teeth, I want to say, rule. Ends up, we read it and he goes like, why is it referencing 4 attacks? Does this thing have 4 attacks? Turns out it used to have 4 attacks base, which is embarrassing. Why would you design that? So yeah, 4 attacks is terrible. 8 attacks is still not the best, but yeah, the special rule has references its 4 attacks still. So anyway, it and the mounted sons go into my skeletons. Oh, which by the way, I did 1 wound to these mounted sons, so no thunderous there. So they're wounding me on 3s, although my opponent will probably go for the Bane Chant. Yeah, I'm not sure the skeletons can hold that charge. I mean, again, it's 20 attacks. Now that we know this thing has 8 attacks, if it had 4, this would be a joke. But yeah, mostly it's the 20 attacks here, probably with the Bane Chant going. So that is like 12-ish wounds, so it's pretty high. This is only a 23, right? So I don't know. I think I'll hold, but it's dicey. It's not a unless my opponent rolls all 6s, right? I'll stay. So interesting. And here are the combats. My opponent ends up doing, well, let's actually roll a picture back. Yeah, so my opponent ends up doing 8 wounds to the enslaved guardians with all this, so that's not the best rolls. And to make matters worse, doesn't kill them off because these guys, wow, they wreck Apophis. You can see it back there. They do 13 wounds to me. So looking for an 8 to kill. Thankfully, just miss it. And since Apophis is still up, I have a reroll here, which I actually need because my opponent kills me on the first roll, and on the reroll doesn't quite get that 17. So things are looking up for old Millhouse because I still have a loot token. I've lost no units on this side this turn at least, which is the important side. And you can see my skeletons also weather the storm. I think they take like 14 or 15 wounds, something like that. So yeah, nothing, I don't think anything from the Empire dies this turn, which is pretty important because, well, at least this this side is important to not lose the enslaved guardians or Apophis. That's a best case scenario. So moving on to turn 4. So turn 4, things are definitely getting spicy. Let's start on the left where Apophis charges into these mounted suns on the front, and if we roll a picture, 2 pictures back, you can see this bone giant is just looking right at the flank of these guys, and my opponent mistakenly thought that giants were speed 6, they are speed 7, so getting into that flank, giants just doing it naturally, no surge needed. So I take that flank charge, I take Apophis into the front, my enslaved guardians turn around to hopefully kill off these hero dogs, and I just hope to roast the chieftain. I've got 1 drain life, and I've got a horde of archers ready to shoot into him if I need them. I do generate a loot token with the mummies, and so the way I do this is the scenario states that at the start of your turn, if you control the token, the control point, you generate the token, and then at the start of your movement is when you can choose to drop loot. So I generate a token, and then at the start of my turn, and then at the start of the mummy's movement, I decide to just drop the token. And it looks like it's not in base to base, and it's because the mummies were originally like this, right? So they drop it and then just spin around because I'm going for a hard flank into the Jabberwock. So that's the plan there, and I just take the skeletons and charge into the front of the Sons of Korgan. So the plan is I've got a Surge here and Mortibrus here, and I'm just going to cast Surge onto these mummies, hopefully kill off the Jabberwock, and then things should be pretty good for me, assuming I kill off all these charges too. And we'll see about that. Moving into, yeah, so with, it looks like I didn't grab a picture of it. I actually almost nailed the Surge with my first Surge here, getting 7 of the 8 inches I needed, giggity, and then Mortibrus finishes off for the 1 extra. But if I'd nailed it with the first bit, I could have even got another crushing onto the skeletons, or maybe a lightning bolt, something. But, yep. I get that. Here is the end of shooting, which is I do manage to drain the life out of this chieftain, again, due to Dread. Dread is such a good rule. And I do manage to get that surge off, so yeah, you do get to see it there. It looks like the skeletons took 13 wounds. That can't be... Oh, I must have healed it with the... I must have healed the skeletons with the drain life. So... here's the end of this combat with another blurry picture. The mummies easily kill off that Jabberwock. It's not even close. They do like 14 or 15 wounds. Elite and Vicious on these units is just ridiculous. My skeletons go into the front here and do something. We'll see. I don't think I've done that combat yet. So here is the end of the turn. Oh, yes. So on the left here, the enslaved guardians kill off the dogs. Like I said before, the shooting kills off the chieftain. Apophis plus the giant, who's actually where this base is, kill off the Sons of Korgan here. And then you can see my opponent's actually picked him up, but if we walk back here, these knights. So again, remember at the beginning when I said it's weird that you didn't buy Fury on these, right? Because the skeletons do 1 wound and then roll a boxcar and get the waiver. So yeah, these guys are wavered. There's just a wizard for my opponent's turn 4, and he goes, let's just go grab a beer and call it good. So that is the end of the game. The Empire of Dust did very well. Of course, you know, they did win, but I like this list a lot more. than the previous one, or the previous Empire of Dust list I have been playing. It's not quite as good as I have one where I run 2 Enslaved Guardian hordes instead of the archers or anything like that. I don't know. I like 1 horde of Enslaved Guardians. I love the mummy formation. I love Apophis in this. I like the chariot regiments mostly because I had them painted. And then skeleton warriors are obviously excellent. The archers are pretty meh. The soul snare is good, but not necessarily an auto include. I'm enjoying it right now because I expect in Kings of War version 3, which is, you know, probably coming up sometime this year, I doubt it's going to stay at this power level, or if it does, the game will drastically change. So I'm looking forward to just playing it till then. So yeah, that is the end of the battle report. I end up for the score, there's a loot token just sitting in the middle of the table. It's only 1 loot, so it is a 1-0 victory, but it's probably going to be a tabling. I mean, this is only turn 4. Next turn, my opponent has a lightning bolt, I guess, to shoot me with. I think they're lightning bolt 3, so you can shoot into Apophis. Hope to kill that off. Even if all 3 sink, Apophis goes to 16 wounds there, so needing a 5 to kill. Assuming Apophis dies there, I can then pretty easily still get the kill onto these knights, or maybe at least get them scared due to the mummies, and then I can kill off this wizard. I think I can easily get a full table clear by the end of the game, with probably only losing my unit of skeleton warriors next and Apophis. And even then, it would have to be some pretty strong dice to lose Apophis, or not the strongest, but spiky dice to lose Apophis. So yeah, I like the army, and again, if you guys have any line on cheap Ushabti, make sure to let me know. Until then, bye.